talk for, I don't know, 20 minutes or half an hour. And he gave me this notebook here that Lowell Newvine wrote about Don's experiences in World War II. And after I got done interviewing Don, I went home and I read through this. And I said, well, every other year I've wrote up a speech for whoever we honor. And when I read this, I said, there's not a lot I can add to it. So I said, I'll just read this year because Lowell did such a good job. Anyhow, Don grew up in Plainville, New York, located in Town Lysander, Onondaga County, New York. His father made a living as a sharecropper. His mother was one of 16 siblings. In 1944, Don already had 2 brothers fighting in the war. But Don figured they couldn't win it by themselves without his help. So even though he was only 17 years old at the time, he enlisted in the U.S. Army in July of 1944. However, the Army wouldn't take him until he turned 18 the following month in August. Once accepted by the Army, he left Syracuse, New York, headed for Fort Dix, New Jersey. However, his stay was very short as he was immediately sent to Fort McClellan, located adjacent to the city of Anniston, Alabama. During World War II, it was one of the largest U.S. Army installation training an estimated 500,000 troops. In 1942, the Army began training new recruits and draftees at Fort McClellan under what was called the Branch Immaterial Training Center. Recruits received 8 weeks of basic training and were then sent elsewhere for combat training or specialized schools. However, in 1943, this became the Infantry Replacement Training Center, IRTC. Under the IRTC, the basic training was increased to 9 weeks and included situations corresponding to combat in European areas, such as training within simulated urban areas and actions under live artillery fire. Following basic training, Don was given a 10-day furlough that made it possible for Don to be home for Christmas, but his furlough ended all too soon as he had to leave for New York City to board the English ship Queen Mary, and on January 1st, 1945, he headed off to war. During 1940s, the Queen Mary had been refitted as a troop ship with the capabilities to transport over 5,000 troops at a time. Traversing the Atlantic Ocean in a ship during the war also involved a certain element of risk. Early in the war, German U-boats wreaked havoc on the Allied shipping in the Atlantic. However, by January 1945, the German U-boats threat had been largely eliminated. Although there was always the possibility that there might be one stray U-boat left out there. Consequently, on the way over, Don pulled his share of guard duty, and for most of the time, he was seasick. He apparently wasn't cut out for life as a sailor. Don arrived in England, but stayed only one day before he and others were loaded on a boat and transported to Belgium. From there, they were transported by truck to Germany and were assigned to the 3rd Army 9th Infantry Division. The men arrived shortly after the conclusion of the Battle of the Bulge, which was fought between December 16, 1944 and January 25, 1945. In the Ardennes region of Belgium, France, and Luxembourg, it was the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States in World War II. The Allies were ultimately able to prevail, and as a result, the German military resources were severely depleted. From that point on, the Allies relentlessly pushed forward, while the Germans could only offer defensive resistance. The Battle of the Bulge victory by the Americans, however, came at a high cost with an estimated 89,000 casualties, including up to 19,000 killed. The arrival of replacement soldiers like Don helped to replenish some of the depleted ranks. Replacing soldiers killed and wounded in combat units during the war was done on an individual basis. In World War II, except for those soldiers who arrived as a unit at the beginning of the war, men were sent individually into units to replace casualties, rather than pulling battle-depleted units off the line and replacing them in combat with fresh rested unit. Army Chief of Staff George Marshall and General Leslie McNair, Commander of Army Ground Forces, implemented the individual replacement system. The Americans deemed it logistically difficult to transport across oceans the equipment which would be necessary to arm an entire replacement unit. For the next 3 months, Don would see his share of steady, hard combat from a distance. He saw a German city almost totally engulfed in flames, the result of Allied bombing. In that time, his group also took in lots of German prisoners as German resistance crumbled. By mid-April, Don's unit had pushed westward to the extent that they were located on the west bank of the Elbe River, about 10 miles from Berlin. In the meantime, the Soviet army was closing in on Berlin from the east. Not wanting to be at the mercy of the Soviets, German soldiers and civilians alike swam across the Elbe River to surrender to the Americans. After this, the main job of Don's unit was guarding the German prisoners of war. On May 8, 1945, the Germans officially surrendered unconditionally to the Allies, bringing a final end to the war in Europe. After the war, per Potsdam Agreement, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones, each one controlled by one of the 4 occupying powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin was similarly divided into 4 sectors, despite the fact that it was located fully within the Soviet zone. The non-Soviet zones were later combined to create West Germany and West Berlin, while the Soviet zones became known as East Germany and East Berlin. The two Germanys were finally reunited in 1990. As for Don, soon after the surrender, he was transported by train to Hamburg, Germany, where he was assigned to the 41st Replacement Battalion. His camp was located approximately 5 miles outside the city. For duty, he was assigned to be the assistant to the supply sergeant. His name was Jimmy Sellers and was originally from Kentucky. While stationed there, Don received a 10-day furlough and took that opportunity to visit Switzerland. Don was particularly impressed with the Swiss Alps. After 4 or 5 months, Jimmy Sellers was able to leave the Army and go home. At that time, Don was promoted to supply sergeant. He held that position until July of 1946, when he was eligible to get out of the Army. He crossed the Atlantic again by ship and was discharged at Fort Dix, New Jersey for his service. Don was awarded the Combat Infantry Badge, Good Conduct Medal, and the Victory Medal. Don married Virginia Umbeck on September 13, 1947. They had a little over 55 years of married life together when Virginia passed away on July 29, 2003. Don worked for 26 years as U.S. Postal Service. As a rural mail carrier, he joined the Hannibal Volunteer Fire Company in 1948 and worked his way up the ranks and was elected fire chief in 1978. He served in that capacity for 5 years. He was a volunteer fireman for over 40 years. On October 3rd, 2015, Don had the privilege to participate in the Honor Flight Syracuse Mission 006. Honor Flight Syracuse is one of 140 regional hubs that make up the National Honor Flight Network. It is a not-for-profit organization created to honor American veterans for their sacrifices. Mission 006 consisted of military veterans of World War II and the Korean War. The veterans were given a huge send-off prior to their flight from Syracuse Hancock Airport to Washington, D.C. Once there, the veterans were able to see the Jefferson Memorial, the Washington Memorial, and the Lincoln Memorial. They spent considerable time at the World War II Memorial and were greeted by former U.S. Senator Bob Dole. They also visited the Korean War Memorial and the Vietnam Memorial. Their visit also included a stop at Arlington National Cemetery, where they observed the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. At the conclusion of their visit, the veterans were flown back to Syracuse to another grand welcoming, complete with a group playing bagpipes and color guard. Don and all the other veterans, found it to be a wonderful, moving experience. Over the years, Don has served his country well in time of war and his local community well as a civilian. He has truly earned his place as a member of what former newscaster and author Tom Brokaw called America's Greatest Generation. I'd also like to add, Don's been a member of the American Legion here since 1960. And with that, I'd ask that all of you get a chance tonight to shake the